In the year 536, the sun disappeared. Not for hours, not for days. For 18 long months, a strange and unnatural fog covered the skies of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The crops withered. Famine crept across entire continents. And what came after was even worse. This is the year historians today call the worst year to be alive in human history. This is the story of the year 536. To understand what happened, you have to forget everything you think you know about the so-called Dark Ages. Forget the cartoon image of knights and castles. Forget the simple peasants in muddy fields. In the early 6th century, Europe was not the world of medieval legend. It was something stranger, something more fragile, something that in the space of a single year would come undone. The Western Roman Empire had already fallen 60 years before. The great city of Rome itself, once home to more than 1 million people, had shrunk to perhaps 30,000 souls wandering through enormous ruins. Aqueducts still carried water through fields where wolves now hunted. Marble columns still held up the roofs of temples no one prayed in anymore. The world had not yet realized that an age had ended. In the east, however, the Roman Empire still stood. From the city of Constantinople, the Emperor Justinian ruled over a realm that stretched from the Balkans to Egypt, from Syria to North Africa. His armies under the legendary general Belisarius were on the march. His engineers were building what would become the greatest church in the Christian world, the Hagia Sophia. His scribes were compiling the laws that would shape European civilization for the next 1,000 years. Justinian believed he was rebuilding the empire. He believed Rome would rise again, under his rule, glorious and whole. He did not know what was coming. In northern Europe, the world was very different. The forests stretched on, dark and unbroken, from the coasts of what we now call Britain all the way to the rivers of Central Asia. In these forests lived peoples the Romans had once called barbarians: the Franks, the Goths, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Slavs. Some had built kingdoms on the bones of the old empire. Others still lived in wooden longhouses, gathered around hearthfires telling stories of their gods. Their lives were hard, but they were not poor in the way we imagine. A farmer in 6th century Gaul or Britain or the Rhineland lived on a small plot of land with his family. He kept pigs, perhaps a cow, a few chickens. He grew wheat or barley or rye. In a good year, he had enough to feed his children, to brew a little ale, to give a portion to his lord, and another to the church. He owned an iron axe, a wooden plough, a clay pot or two. His wife wove cloth from wool she had spun herself. His children played with bone dice and carved wooden toys. It was a small life, a quiet life, but it was a life that worked. And then came the spring of 536. The first to notice were the chroniclers, the men whose job it was to record the events of their time. In Constantinople, a Roman official named Procopius wrote down what he saw, and his words have come down to us across the centuries. He wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. Think about what that means. Imagine waking up one morning and the sun is wrong. It is still there. You can still see it in the sky, but it gives no warmth. It casts no proper shadow. It looks pale and sick, like a coin that has been left out in the rain. And then the next day, it is the same, and the next, and the next. In Italy, a senator named Cassiodorus wrote a letter to his fellow nobles, trying to make sense of what was happening. We marvel to see, he wrote, no shadows of our bodies at noon. The sun's rays are weakened. They appear of a bluish colour. We have a summer without heat. The crops have been chilled by north winds. The rain is denied. In Ireland, monks in their stone monasteries kept careful records of the years. Their chronicles for 536 are short, but they are devastating. A failure of bread, they wrote. A failure of bread from the year 536 to 539. 3 years of failing harvests. In China, on the other side of the world, official histories recorded yellow dust raining down like snow. The stars were dimmed. The summer brought frost. Crops did not ripen. This was not local weather. This was not a bad season. Something had happened to the entire planet, and the people who lived through it had no idea what. Imagine being a farmer in the Frankish kingdom, in what we now call France, in the summer of 536. You have planted your fields as your father did, and his father before him. You have watched the sky for rain, for sun, for the signs that tell a farmer when to plough and when to harvest. You know the rhythms of the seasons the way a musician knows a song. And now the song has stopped. The sun rises every morning, but it brings no warmth. The wheat in your fields, which should be growing tall and golden by midsummer, stays short and pale. The leaves on the trees never reach their full green. The birds that should be singing are silent. The bees do not come. By July, frost still appears on the ground in the mornings. By August, you understand, there will be no harvest this year. You have grain stored from last year, maybe enough for a few months, maybe enough, if you are careful, to get through the winter. But the next planting season comes, and the sky is still wrong. The seeds you sow do not grow, or they grow stunted, useless, and now your storehouse is almost empty. This is what happened in millions of homes across half the world. The historians of the time tried to find meaning in it. They reached for the only language they had, the language of religion, of omens, of divine judgment. A monk in Syria wrote that the sun became dark, and its darkness lasted for 1.5 years. And men said that the sun would never recover its full light again. The fruits did not ripen, and the wine tasted like sour grapes. Across the Mediterranean, in the great library cities of the late ancient world, scholars searched their old books for any record of something like this. They found nothing. There had never been a year like this. Not in living memory. Not in the records of their grandfathers or their grandfathers' grandfathers. It was as if the world itself had broken. And then winter came. The winter of 536 to 537 was, by every account we have, one of the coldest and longest in recorded history. In what is now Sweden, archaeologists have found something chilling. Entire villages abandoned in this period with their doors still closed. The people inside had simply died, frozen or starved, or fallen sick, and no one had come to bury them. Their bones lay where they had fallen for centuries. In Scandinavia, the population may have collapsed by as much as half during these years. Half. Imagine your village, your town, your city, and then imagine 1 in every 2 people you know is gone. The Norse peoples of the north would later remember this time in their myths. They called it the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, the winter of winters, the winter that came before the end of the world. In their stories, the Fimbulwinter is the sign that Ragnarok is coming. The sun is swallowed, the crops fail, brother kills brother for food. The gods themselves prepare for the final battle. For a long time, scholars thought the Fimbulwinter was just a myth, a poetic invention, a way of imagining the end of all things. But now we know better. Now we know that the Fimbulwinter was real. Their ancestors had lived through it, and they had passed the memory down, generation after generation, in the only way they knew how, as a story so terrible it could only belong to the end of the world. But the cold was only the beginning. because something even worse was waiting in the spring. When the spring of 537 came, the people of Europe waited for the sky to clear. They had survived one terrible year. They had buried their dead. They had eaten the last of their grain, slaughtered the last of their pigs, boiled the leather of their boots in desperate attempts to make broth. They lit candles in their churches and longhouses, and they prayed that this year the sun would return. It did not. The fog was still there, thinner, perhaps, but still there. The chroniclers of the time describe a second summer of failing crops, a second autumn without harvest. In Ireland, the monks wrote simply, failure of bread. Again. In China, the imperial records described famine so severe that people resorted to unspeakable things to survive. In Mesopotamia, refugees streamed out of the countryside, packing into the cities in search of food that was not there. This was the first global famine in recorded history. And the truly terrifying thing is, no one knew why. For nearly 1,500 years, the year 536 remained a mystery. Historians read the strange accounts of dimmed sun and failed harvests, and they did not know what to make of them. Some thought it must have been exaggeration, medieval writers prone to dramatic language. Others suggested perhaps a comet had passed close to Earth, or a great forest fire had filled the sky with smoke. It was not until the late 20th century that the truth began to emerge, and it came from a place no one expected: the ice. In Greenland and in Antarctica, scientists drilling deep into the polar ice caps were pulling up cores of frozen water that contained a record of Earth's atmosphere, stretching back tens of thousands of years. Every layer of ice held the dust, the pollen, the chemicals that had been in the air the year that snow had fallen. It was like reading a diary written by the planet itself. And in the layers corresponding to the year 536, the scientists found something extraordinary: a massive spike in sulfate particles, the chemical signature of a volcanic eruption. An eruption so enormous that its ash had been thrown into the upper atmosphere and carried around the entire world. But where? Where was this volcano? For years, no one could agree. Some pointed to the tropics, perhaps a great eruption in El Salvador or Indonesia. Others suggested somewhere in the North Atlantic, perhaps Iceland. Then, in 2018, a team of researchers led by a scientist named Michael McCormick at Harvard University announced a breakthrough. By analyzing tiny shards of volcanic glass trapped in the Greenland ice, too small to see with the naked eye, just specks under a microscope, they had matched the chemistry of the eruption to a specific region. The volcano was in Iceland, in early 536. Somewhere on that island of fire and ice, a vast volcanic eruption had torn open the earth. It threw millions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide gas into the stratosphere. The prevailing winds carried this veil of dust eastward, across Europe, across Asia, across the Middle East. It blocked sunlight. It cooled the entire northern hemisphere, and it triggered a chain reaction of crop failure, famine, and death that would last for years. And then, as if that were not enough, another volcano erupted in 540, and possibly a third in 547. 3 eruptions in a little over a decade. The worst volcanic decade of the last 2,000 years. The people of the 6th century did not know any of this. They could not have known. They lived in a world without telescopes, without microscopes, without ice cores or satellites. To them, the dimming of the sun was an act of God, or an act of demons, or the wrath of older gods, half forgotten, returning to claim what was theirs. They tried to make sense of it the only way they could. They fasted. They prayed. They held processions through their starving cities. In Constantinople, the Emperor Justinian ordered new churches built. In the villages of Gaul and Germania, people went out at night to leave offerings at old pagan altars. just in case. Across the Christian world, preachers stood in pulpits and warned that the end of days was at hand. And then, in the year 541, something appeared on the edges of the empire that seemed to confirm every prophecy of doom. A ship arrived at the port of Pelusium in Egypt. It had come from somewhere in East Africa, or perhaps further still, and it carried a cargo that no one on board knew was deadly. It carried rats, and the rats carried fleas, and the fleas carried a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. We know this microbe today by another name. We call it the plague. The disease that erupted from that ship would, within months, sweep across the Mediterranean world. It would reach Constantinople, the heart of the empire, within a year. There, at the height of the outbreak, contemporaries claimed that 10,000 people were dying every single day. 10,000. Every day. In a city of perhaps 500,000. The historian Procopius, the same man who had recorded the dimming of the sun, now wrote one of the most chilling eyewitness accounts in all of ancient literature. He described how the disease began with a sudden fever, how dark swellings appeared on the body, how some victims fell into a deep coma, how others were driven mad with hallucinations, running through the streets, screaming until they collapsed. He described how the bodies piled up faster than they could be buried, how the emperor ordered great pits dug outside the city and bodies thrown into them by the hundreds, how the towers of the city walls were filled with corpses and sealed because there was nowhere else to put them. He described the smell. He described the silence in the streets where once there had been crowds. He described in the end how he himself contracted the plague and how he survived, and how he could never afterwards speak of those days without horror. This was the beginning of what we now call the Plague of Justinian. Over the next 2 centuries, in wave after wave, it would kill an estimated 30 to 50 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It would reshape the entire ancient world. And it had been set in motion in part by a sun that would not shine. Before we continue into what came next, and I promise you the story gets even more remarkable, I want to take just one moment. If you are still watching, if this story is pulling you in the way it pulled me in when I first discovered it, then please take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love history the way you do. And if you have not yet subscribed to Walter Reconstructs History, consider doing that now. Every week I dig into the forgotten corners of the past, the moments that shaped our world but rarely make it into the textbooks. Subscribe, and you will not miss what comes next. Now, let us return to the year 541, because the plague was only beginning. By the autumn of 542, the Plague of Justinian had reached its peak in Constantinople. The emperor himself had fallen ill. He survived, but barely. His city did not. When the disease finally began to recede, the population of the greatest city in the Christian world had been cut nearly in half. Whole neighborhoods stood empty. Workshops were silent. The great construction projects Justinian had launched, the new churches, the rebuilt fortifications, slowed to a crawl as the workers died or fled. Tax revenues collapsed. The army shrank. The dream of restoring the Roman Empire, which had seemed so close just a few years before, began quietly to die. And from Constantinople, the plague spread outward in every direction. It followed the trade routes, it followed the rivers, it followed the armies. It reached Italy, where Justinian's general Belisarius was fighting to retake the peninsula from the Goths. It reached Gaul, where Frankish kings were consolidating their power. It reached Spain. It reached the British Isles. It reached the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Persia. A Welsh chronicle from this period records, simply, the Great Death of Maelgwn. Maelgwn was a king of Gwynedd in what is now Wales. According to legend, he saw the plague approaching, knew he could not escape it, and locked himself inside a church to face his end alone. When his followers finally opened the doors days later, they found him dead on the stone floor. This story was told and retold in the Welsh tradition for centuries. The Yellow Plague, they called it, and every village had its own version, every family had its own dead. In Ireland, the chronicles record the plague reaching even the remote monasteries on the western coast. Saints died, scholars died. Some of the greatest centres of learning in early medieval Europe lost half their monks or more. The books in many places simply stopped being written for a generation. In Britain, something even stranger happened. The plague struck the Romano-British population, the descendants of the old Roman province, but it appears from the archaeological record to have largely spared the Anglo-Saxon newcomers who lived in the east and north of the island. The reasons are still debated. Perhaps the Saxons traded less with the Mediterranean world. Perhaps their settlements were more isolated. Perhaps it was simply chance. But the result was profound. In the decades after the plague, the balance of power in Britain shifted decisively. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms grew. The Romano-British kingdoms shrank. The England we know today, its language, its place names, its very name, may owe its existence in part to a tiny bacterium that came east on a ship in the year 541. Across the wider world, the consequences cascaded for generations. Mediterranean, the great cities never quite recovered to their old size. Trade contracted, coinage became scarcer. The connections that had bound the Roman world together, the shipping lanes, the road networks, the common currency, frayed and broke. Europe turned inward. The age we now call the early Middle Ages, with its smaller kingdoms and more local horizons, was born in part out of the deaths of the 540s. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire, the great rival of Rome, was also devastated. Within a century, both Rome and Persia had been so weakened by repeated plague outbreaks that they could not resist the explosive rise of a new power from the Arabian Peninsula. The armies of the early Islamic caliphates would sweep across territories that, just decades before, would have been impossibly defended. Some historians now argue that the rise of Islam itself as a world-shaping force would have been unthinkable without the long shadow of 536. This is the thing that is hardest to grasp about that year. It did not just kill people, it killed possibilities, it killed futures, it killed the world that might have been. Imagine for a moment the Roman Empire that Justinian was so close to rebuilding. Imagine a Mediterranean that stayed unified under Constantinople's rule. Imagine the libraries of Alexandria still standing, the philosophical schools of Athens still teaching, the long memory of the classical world preserved unbroken into the centuries that followed. Imagine a Europe that never went through what we call the Dark Ages at all. That world was possible. That world was perhaps even probable, and it died somewhere over Iceland in early 536, when the mountains split open and the ash rose into the sky. What we got instead was different, smaller, slower, poorer in many ways than the world that came before. The libraries burned, or were forgotten. The roads crumbled. The literacy of ordinary people, which had been remarkable in Roman times, collapsed almost entirely. For 3 or 4 centuries across most of Europe, the lights of learning would flicker very low. But, and this is important, they did not go out. In monasteries from Ireland to Italy, monks kept copying the old books. In villages from Wales to Bulgaria, peasants kept planting the old crops. The skills survived. The stories survived. The faith, in many forms, survived. And slowly, over centuries, A new world was built on the foundations of the old. The Europe that emerged from the long shadow of 536 was not the Europe of Rome. It was something else. It was the Europe of Charlemagne and of the medieval cathedrals, and eventually of the Renaissance and the modern age. It was a world born, in some real sense, out of darkness. When we look back today at the people who lived through 536, the Frankish farmer watching his fields fail, the Roman senator writing his bewildered letter about the dimmed sun, the Welsh king locking himself in a church to die alone, what we feel, if we let ourselves feel anything, is a kind of awe. They did not understand what was happening to them. They had no scientists to explain volcanic aerosols, no microbiologists to identify Yersinia pestis, no ice cores to read the planet's diary. They had only their faith, their families, their fields, and their hope that the sun would eventually return. And here is the remarkable thing. The sun did return. The fog did clear. The crops did grow again. The children of the people who lived through 536 inherited a world that was harder than the one their grandparents had known, but it was still a world. They lived in it. They built in it. They told stories about the year their ancestors had endured, and those stories, passed down in monastery chronicles and Norse poems and Welsh legends and Chinese histories, have come down to us across 1500 years, so that we, today, can know what happened, so that we can stand in the long line of human memory and say, yes, it was real, and yes, they survived. That is the lesson of 536, if it has a lesson. Not that the world was ending, but that, even when it seemed to be, it was not. So, that is the story of the worst year in human history. The year the sun went dark, the year the harvests failed, the year the plague came east on a ship, the year a volcano in Iceland reshaped the future of 3 continents. Thank you for staying with me through this one. I know it was a long story and a heavy one. If it moved you, if it taught you something you did not know before, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. And here is what I really want to ask. What story do you want me to tell next? Is there a forgotten year, a forgotten king, a forgotten battle, a forgotten plague that you have always wanted to know more about? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and the next video on this channel might just be the one you suggest. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, and remember, the people of 536 had no idea their world would survive, but it did, and so will yours. This has been Walter Reconstructs History. I will see you in the next one.